Welcome back to my channel, guys. It is so good to have you back here again for another episode. And if you are new here, hello and welcome. You are watching True Crime and Chill, where I talk about some of the most interesting and very shocking cases out there. So if you would like to keep chilling with me every week when I upload a new episode, then I highly recommend that you subscribe to the channel and also follow me on my other socials so you never miss out when I have a new episode ready and waiting just for you. Now, before I get into the case, I have to give out a content warning that in this case, I will be talking about some sexual assault, murder, and also grievous bodily harm to children. So if you are sensitive to that kind of content, then viewer discretion is very much advised. All right, now let's get into the case. This week's case is another serial killer case, and the person we're going to be talking about is a man by the name of Bulelani Mabhayi, a serial killer and rapist who became the nightmare for the women and children of the village of Tholeni in the Eastern Cape. So much so that they dubbed him the name of the monster of Tholeni. I'm going to tell you right now, okay, this guy was the devil incarnate. He was up there with the worst of the worst serial killers. And I know I've covered up some messed up serial killer cases, but trust me, this guy is up there with the worst of them, okay? So let me just go ahead and tell you all about this guy. Bulelani was born in 1974, and he lived all of his life in the village of Tholeni in the Eastern Cape. And he never really had a lot of friends because he was a quiet person. He was always a loner. So you wouldn't actually find him hanging out with someone a lot. He was always just a person in his own company. When he was 12 years old, he and his brother lost their mother. And just a year later, their father also passed away. So they became orphans at a very young age. And this had quite an effect on him because later on in his teenage life, he got to be involved in a lot of criminal activities. So much so that when he was in his early 20s, he got arrested for 3 years for possession of the devil's lettuce, also known as marijuana. And he wasn't the only one who got involved in criminal activities because his brother also got involved in them as well. And he also ended up being arrested for the murder of another person, and he got to serve life in prison. But for some reason, he ended up dying. I don't know if it was before he got to serve his sentence or while he was serving his sentence, but his brother ended up passing away. So Bulelani is not the only one who you could say might have gotten affected by the loss of their parents. And if we've learned anything about serial killers, is that a lot of them get to be what they are due to traumatic experiences or maybe some bad upbringing. And in my opinion, I think this could have been one of the reasons why he was set on a life of crime. Maybe the loss of his parents was a bit too much for him to handle. And even in his adulthood, it could have been one of the reasons why he turned out the way he did. But that's just my opinion. But even though he didn't really have a lot of friends, Bulelani was actually well known in the village of Tholeni. And he was actually really liked because he worked as a builder and also as a handyman. So he knew people and he would get around a lot, go into people's houses to go fix something or to go build something. So even though he had no friends, he was known by the community members. And because of the fact that he was such a quiet and nice guy, a lot of people could never have suspected that he would have been capable of doing anything like this, that he would have been someone who became a complete nightmare. And I mean the angel of death in that village. So no one really saw this coming from him. Because between 2007 and 2012, he took the lives of 20 women and young children in the village. And he did this in one of the most brutal ways I could ever talk about on my channel. So what this guy did was he would stalk houses and break into them. But he chose houses that were specifically headed by women, either elderly women or young women. And then once he breaks into these houses in the middle of the night, he would sexually assault the women of that house and also kill the children while he's at it. And sometimes he would also rape even the young children that were in that house. So no one was really safe from this guy's wrath. Everyone in the house who was there to witness what he did ended up getting hacked with an axe to death. And a lot of people suffered multiple blows to the head, which ended up being how they all died. Bulelani started his attacks in May of 2007 when he broke into the house of a 79-year-old woman by the name of Nofinish Mayekiso. And what happened was, before he got to kill her, earlier in that day, they got into a bit of an argument. They had a bit of a fallout, which led Bulelani to go back to his place later at night to go get his axe, and then he went back to her house and he broke in, sexually assaulted her, and then hacked her to death with his axe. And Mayekiso was actually the oldest victim that Bulelani murdered in this case. And according to Bulelani himself, he said that he only chose weak appearing victims so he could easily overpower them and then have the ability to kill them afterwards. So this is why he went to houses that had no men in them, because he must have thought that having a man in the house would cause a bit of a problem for him, because he would have to, I don't know, put in a lot more effort to overpower a man. And sometimes he might even fail at it and get caught. So this is why he ended up choosing houses that were only headed by women. And another thing that he said was that since he was so well known in the community, he had to kill his victims so that no one could end up identifying him later on as a witness if he were to get caught. Bulelani was 33 years old at the time of these incidents, and even though his oldest victim was 79 years old, his youngest victim was a 14-month-old baby, and he said that even though the baby would never have been able to identify him anyway, he had to kill the kid because he was taken over by an evil spirit, which is something that we're going to talk about a little bit later on in the video. And then a year later in 2008, he took the lives of 3 more victims when he broke into the house of the Mafika family, and he killed a woman by the name of Nletiso Mafika and another woman by the name of Zinka Mafika and a little child by the name of Lazola Mafika. And then just a few months later, still in 2008, he broke into the house of a woman by the name of Nomandla Mngelo. And then after killing Nomandla, he also killed her 13-year-old daughter or granddaughter. It wasn't actually specified, but he killed the 13-year-old girl after sexually assaulting her as well. So no one was really safe from this guy's wrath. If a girl was in the house, she would also be sexually assaulted by Bulelani once he got done raping the elderly women or the young women in that house. No one at all could be safe from this guy. Nomandla's son, Mteto Mngelo, was in Gauteng at the time of the murders because he left the family to go look for work opportunities in 2006. So when he was finally coming back home, thinking that he was going to spend time with his family, that's when he got the news that his entire family had been hacked with an axe. And he said that what was so painful about this was the fact that he was thinking about all the time they were going to spend together and how much he missed his family, but now he came back to an empty house that was filled with the void of death. The following year in 2009, Bulelani started off the year in January with another murder of a woman by the name of Nokwezi Nogaya and her daughter, Sipokolo Nogaya, after breaking into their house and sexually assaulting the both of them. And one of the community members of the village of Tholeni said that this guy mostly attacked around midnight because that's when they would hear a lot of screams around the community that night. But a lot of people were afraid to come out to see what was happening because no one wanted to die, especially the women of that village, because people were starting to see that now the women and young children of the village were being killed. So a lot of them were afraid to come out, but they said that around midnight, this is when Bulelani would strike. And also when people started getting aware, when the women started getting aware that women, young women, elderly women, and also children were getting killed in the village, most of them did not want to sleep in their houses anymore. They didn't feel safe, so they went to go sleep at the house of a woman by the name of Nomfundisi. And it turns out that Nomfundisi had enough space for about 29 women to come and sleep at her place, because a lot of them, especially when it became dark, they couldn't really sleep in their houses. They felt unsafe. So they would take their children and go move in with Nomfundisi, and they would sleep at her house. And then earlier in the day, they would go back to their houses the next day. But when it came time for darkness to come around, they would go back to her house to go seek some shelter. And there was a theory out there about why Bulelani did the things that he did. And the theory was about a spiritual sickness that is caused by this spirit known as Ingungu. And according to the Xhosa custom, when a person kills someone, they have to do a cleansing ceremony right after murdering that person. And if they don't do it, this spirit would follow them and cause them to keep killing people each time or every year at the same time they killed someone the previous year. And I don't really know a lot about, the custom of the Xhosa tribe because I am Sotho, so I'm not really going to say much about it. But this was the theory that was suggested by a prominent traditional affairs researcher, a woman by the name of Nompumelelo Makuliwe. So that's the theory that she put up in the case, that he could have done this because of that. And he also jumped at the opportunity to say that he was taken over by an evil spirit when he killed these people. So like I said, I personally don't know a lot about the Xhosa tribe customs, but that's, you can take that with a grain of salt, however you want to take it, whatever you want to do with it, but that's what was suggested. And in 2010, as Bulelani kept on packing up more bodies, the police were trying to figure out if these murders were connected in any way, if these murders were being committed by the same person. And in doing so, they dispatched a task force in the village to try to find any clue or something that could tell them who this person was or who these people were that were committing these murders. Because again, they weren't really sure that they were dealing with just one person here. A criminal psychologist was also put on the task force to try to help them build a profile so they can know who exactly they're dealing with here, and if they really are dealing with just one person or if they're dealing with multiple people. And the profile they built said that they were looking for a black man who was well known in the community and a person who was familiar with the houses of his victims, someone who knew exactly what to do, when to do it, and a person was above the age of 16, and this person had to have been charged before with sexual assault charges. So he wasn't really a first-time offender. Oh, and another important thing that the profile stated was that this guy wouldn't immediately be suspected of being the kind of person who would do this. And it makes a lot of sense because remember what I said in the beginning of the case, that Bulelani was not suspected to be the person who was doing any of these things. So now the profile was also saying the same thing, that you wouldn't see him coming. And since the victims were sexually assaulted, this meant that the police had a lot of DNA evidence to work with. But now all they had to do was find a suspect so they can try to see if they can compare his DNA and match it to the DNA that they already collected from the crime scenes. And in my opinion, this really should have been when the police realized that they were dealing with one person. Because if they had the DNA evidence from the different crime scenes, they should have compared the evidence to one another and then saw that it came from a single person because all the DNA evidence matched. So that would have given them the idea that they were not actually dealing with multiple suspects, but they were dealing with a serial killer. But that's just my opinion. And since the criminal profile that was built said that the police were looking for someone above the age of 16 who was in the community of Tholeni, the police had an idea that they should set up a fingerprint and DNA collection center in the community in 2010. And what they did was they were asking the men and teenagers above the age of 16 to come in and give in their DNA as well as their fingerprints so they could try to see if they could match any of them to the ones that were found at the crime scene. But this process was entirely voluntary. No one was forced to come and do it. But a lot of them, I think they did it because they knew that if they didn't go and give in their DNA sample as well as their fingerprints, they would start being looked at from a very suspicious angle. Because why would you refuse if you have nothing to hide? And this was the idea that Bulelani also had in his mind, that he would also go and give in his DNA and his fingerprints at the collection center so they wouldn't see him as a possible suspect. Oh, if only they knew that the murdering devil they were looking for was right there that day. If only they knew. But there was a problem when Bulelani went to go give in his DNA and his fingerprints. He didn't have his identification with him, and because of this, they couldn't really take his fingerprints, but they only took his DNA sample. And since they only took his DNA without his fingerprints, they put aside his DNA sample and ended up forgetting about it. So it was never put in the system to try to be matched with the DNA profile of the suspect that they collected from the various crime scenes. I swear to God, the police frustrate me so much when they drop the ball like this during these investigations. God damn. And about a month later in 2010, after the whole DNA collection process was done, Bulelani took the life of another woman by the name of Sinazo Mbeki and her 2 grandsons when he broke into their house and attacked them during the night after sexually assaulting Sinazo. But these murders were the ones that got the police to finally create a link between all of the murders that had been happening since 2007. So now they finally got to realize that they were dealing with a serial killer, and they were confident that they were looking for one person instead of multiple people who could have been committing these crimes. When I also think about it, and maybe you might even agree with me on this one, the fact that these murders were so spread apart from each other could have been the reason why the police thought that they were not committed by the same person, because some of them were months apart to 1 year apart. So maybe that's why they ended up thinking that they were dealing with multiple suspects with different motives. But for you smart cookies out there, you might be saying, no, that doesn't make any sense, because if they were investigating the crime scenes, they would have noticed that this person was killing these people in the same way. And we all know that serial killers have their own signature ways of killing people. So they could have looked at the murder method of these people, how they were murdered, and they could have realized from that that they were dealing with just one person instead of different suspects. It is possible, that could have been another way they looked at it, but they thought that they were dealing with more than just one person here. And what was so frustrating to the community members of Tholeni was how long it took the police to finally catch this guy. But as South Africans, we know that in locations that are mostly poor or rural, it's not so easy, or it's not so often that they get attention or a lot of support from law enforcement. And even if they do get whatever little support they get, it wouldn't be that much. So it would end up taking a very long time for these kind of cases to get solved. But on the 12th of August in 2012, Bulelani took the life of his final victim, a 57-year-old woman by the name of Nophumzile Lubambo. And like the others, Nophumzile was also sexually assaulted and hacked with an axe, and she was discovered by her nephew the next day when he came around the house to check on her. And when he found out that the window of the house was broken into, that's when he started looking around to see what was happening. And he said that's when he found her body covered with a blanket, and she was just lifeless. And it turns out that Nophumzile's granddaughter would have died with her in that house that night. But luckily, a few hours later that day, before the murder happened, her granddaughter wanted to leave. She didn't want to sleep over at her house, so Nophumzile had to call her nephew to come and get her because she just didn't want to sleep there. So had she stayed with her, of course, she would have also been a victim of Bulelani's sexual assault and his murderous rampage. So this girl was, her lucky stars were seriously looking out for her. But it's only unfortunate that we cannot say the same thing about her grandmother. And what was so strange about this was that Nophumzile's yard had dogs in it. She had dogs, but the dogs didn't make a sound that night. Like, they didn't bark to show that there was something they saw in the house. So it was just a quiet night. But one of the family members explained this by saying that he must have gotten in from one of the blind spots of the house where the dogs wouldn't have been able to see him, and he must have known where exactly this blind spot was. And this makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because remember I told you that Bulelani went from house to house fixing or building whatever they wanted him to build or fix. So it would have given him the skill or the expertise to know how to get into each house, or how to, break in without making a sound or without alerting anyone. Maybe that's why the dogs couldn't have seen him or made a sound to show that they heard something. But this time when Bulelani killed Nophumzile, he made a grave mistake that would lead to his capture. During the struggle, while he was killing Nophumzile, one of his shoes fell off. And after he killed her, he ran away without taking the shoe. And this shoe ended up being what led the police straight to his door. Because this shoe of his was a very unique design. And he was the only one in the community who wore those kind of shoes. So when the police got a hold of the shoe and they were asking people around the community if they know someone who would wear this kind of shoe, they started telling them that the only person they ever really see wearing those shoes is Bulelani. And remember, he was a well-known person in that community. So they couldn't have made the mistake about this, because every time he went to their houses to fix something or to build something, they surely must have seen his shoes. So people were speaking out that that shoe was owned by Bulelani Mabhayi. So now the police were starting to realize that they have the guy that they're looking for. Because on the 12th of August in 2012, just a day after killing Nophumzile, Bulelani Mabhayi was finally arrested. So now the people of the village of Tholeni were finally going to get some justice, and they were going to be at peace knowing that no more lives were going to be taken. And this was all because of a damn shoe, just a shoe. And when I think about this, it terrifies me how much this could have gone another way. What if he had taken the shoe after it fell off? Or what if when he got to his place, he burned the other shoe, or he got rid of it when he saw that he left the other one at Nopumzila's house. So this was seriously just by dumb luck. I think the cops just caught this guy by dumb luck. Because if he had done something about the other shoe, they wouldn't have known, or they wouldn't have had evidence to say that, okay, he has the other shoe, even though people were saying he's the one who owned that kind of shoe. If he didn't have it on him, how were they going to prove that he's the person who killed those people? And to prove even further that this could have gone a totally different way, Bulelani was not even on the suspect list of the police. And as a matter of fact, they suspected his brother to be the one who could have killed these people. But it made no sense to me that they were suspecting his brother because his brother was dead. But somehow they did, and let's just be grateful, though, that they managed to catch this guy. Otherwise, who knows how many more people he could have still killed had he not been caught, or had he done something about the other shoe when he got to his place. And his case didn't even need to go to trial, because on the 13th of August in 2012, he pleaded guilty to all the charges that were laid against him. So he saved himself and saved the state a lot of time. Maybe he saw that he was really caught. He was in a corner with nowhere to go, and he just decided that pleading guilty would be the best thing for him to do, which is very good for the people who deserved that justice. Bulelani Mabhayi pleaded guilty to 20 counts of murder, 8 counts of sexual assault, and also 10 counts of breaking and entering with the intent to rape. And he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, which, if you ask me, wasn't justice enough for the people that he murdered and their family. You know, this is one of the reasons, in my opinion, my own personal opinion, this is one of the reasons why I think the death penalty should be reinstated in South Africa. For people like this, people who have no regard for human life whatsoever. A person who does this to people deserves the death penalty. So many people came out to the court during that day of his sentencing, and they were furious. The people of the village of Tholeni were saying that the police should set this guy free so they can deal with him in their own way. And you know that would be quite a bad day for Bulelani, because mob justice is something that, you know, you shouldn't mess with. Bulelani tried to give out an apology to the families of the victims and also the people of Tholeni, but they refused his apology. And after they declined his apology, this man straight up confessed that had he not been caught by the police, he still would have been killing people. Now you got to see why I was saying that the death penalty should be reinstated for people like this. Because had he not been caught, he straight up said he still would have been doing what he did. And if you remember correctly from one of my previous cases, specifically the case of the Phoenix Strangler, one of the detectives said that serial killers don't really stop what they do. They don't stop killing people until they themselves get killed or they get caught by the police. So this guy would still be packing bodies to this day if he was never caught, considering that he got caught because of a goddamn shoe. And then another thing that he said in the court was that he killed people because he had no regard for human life and he held it to no value. So again, now you gotta agree with me that this guy should have gotten way more than just 25 years to life in prison. He deserved a lot more. But yeah, guys, that was the case of Bulelani Mabhayi, the personification of the devil of death himself. Man, this guy was all kinds of messed up. He was not okay. He was not okay. I mean, how do you live with yourself knowing that you've done something like this? How do you... you know, as much as I'm fascinated by these kind of cases and they get me curious about what goes on in the minds of serial killers, how do you live knowing that you took so many people's lives? How do you sleep at night? What happens in your mind? You know, this is why I'm so curious about them. But they're just really all kinds of messed up. They're not okay. They're seriously not okay. And we may never really understand their reasons. But all we can say is that no one deserves to die the way the victims die in these cases. And serial killers are really the kind of people we do not need on this planet. But that is it from me for today, guys. And thank you guys so much for chilling with me throughout the end of the video. And again, if you are new here, please support the channel by becoming a part of it. So with that being said, do subscribe to the channel and also follow me on my other socials so you always know when I have a new episode ready and waiting just for you. And if you've got a case in your mind that you would like me to look at or you would like me to cover, do not be shy. Drop it down in the comment section or DM me in my socials and I will look at it. And if there's enough information to talk about it, I will definitely cover it right here. And to check out my previous videos, go ahead and click on the screen right here to see what else I've talked about in the past. And with that being said, enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy the rest of your week, take care of yourselves, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Cheers.